Hello, and welcome to the We're Not Stumped podcast. I'm your host, Mike Boland, and I'm a congenital amputee of the right hand. In this show, I will interview other amputees and allow them to tell you their incredible life stories. I'll also feature family members of amputees and others who support the amputee community, all in an effort to discuss the challenges and triumphs of those living with limb loss. So stick around and listen to inspirational stories and find out why we say, we're not stumped. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the We're Not Stumped podcast. I'm your host, Mike Boland, and today I got Tim Bump on the podcast. I met Tim in Utah a few weeks ago. We were there for an event that has to do with partial hand and hand amputees, and just his knowledge and everything that he knows about that part of the industry is even more than I know as a congenital myself. So Tim, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, of course. It's great to be here.
Well, thank you. You know, we always start the We're Not Stumped podcast with a segment we call In Your Own Words. So I'd love to hear your story and how you got in this field.
Yeah, so goes way back when I was a kid and grew up in Oregon. I really liked building things, putting things together. Spent a lot of time doing that, playing with Legos. And then kind of growing up, my dad was a physician, and so had experience with medical kind of conversations and talking about things. And so I definitely knew I didn't want to do anything related to medicine when I went to school. So I went into school or undergrad thinking I wanted to do computer science because I liked building computers. I liked understanding the electronics and how all of that fit together. And so as I started that, first semester and all the classes therein, I realized I really don't like programming. I like putting things together and building those things. So I was like, okay, well, this may be not exactly what I wanted to do. So I went on a medical mission trip with my dad and my family, and I got to hang out with some surgeons there. And one of the cool things about that was being able to, understand a little bit more about the human body and how that works, and to learn a little bit more from them. And so that kind of put me in this change in direction of maybe I'll look at something that studies the human body. And so kinesiology was kind of one of those things that piqued my interest, and I took anatomy and started learning all about all this stuff and was like, wow, this is really cool. So once I kind of decided that that was the track I wanted to take, I started looking at, okay, what kind of career can this lead me to? And so I looked at, everyone was going into physical therapy at the school. So I looked into physical therapy and kind of went down that track. And then one of the things I just wasn't quite sure about was with physical therapy, you sit there and you spend a lot of time with people, but then they kind of go off and you don't see them for a long time, and you don't really know if they're doing their exercises, and everything takes so long to, heal when they're doing stuff. So you don't get to any of that like immediate result or reaction from them to say, oh, this is working, this isn't working. So I didn't love that part of it. So when I was kind of looking at other options, I considered like, okay, maybe I want to go to medical school. And then I had a friend who introduced me to prosthetics. And I remembered, actually during school, I had written a paper about the kind of new things about prosthetics that are really interesting. So I started looking into it a little bit more. She was going to school for it and said, oh, this is really cool stuff. Sent me some pictures. I was like, oh, wow, this has everything that I like to do. It's got building things. It's got learning about new technologies. It's got working with the human body and kind of that interface between the two. And so I started shadowing a few different prosthetists and orthotists, and found out that was really, really a passion of mine. And so then I went into school for that. So
yeah, that's pretty neat. I read that you like woodworking and even working on cars and building things, as we talked about a little earlier. And this kind of brings it all together, would you say?
Yeah, it does. It's like the perfect fit between all the things that I like to do. So yeah, it's tinkering a lot.
And the company you're at now, it's called Handspring, is that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
And you, as we were talking earlier, pretty much your organization, you may do all prosthetics and all amputees, but you pretty much primarily focus on upper limb. Is that also correct?
Yeah, that's correct. We see probably at this office, maybe like 70% or more upper extremity. At the office I was at in New York, before I came out here, I was about 50% upper extremity and 50% lower extremity prosthetics. And then I did some orthotics as well there.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And talking about like the prosthetics and your background, for lack of a better term, I know that you had built some. When I saw you in Utah, you had shown me some things you'd built in CAD and 3D printing. How has that changed your industry?
Yeah, it's really grown very quickly. So when I was going to school, we had, this was in 2016, when I started school, we had some 3D printers and we took a class about CAD, but it was very like short, limited, didn't do that much with it, very basic. And then we saw kind of a few booths at maybe a conference that were kind of looking at prosthetics that were 3D printed, but there wasn't a ton out there yet. So even from 2016 to now, I mean, you can see there's a lot of companies that are working on new designs, new types of prosthetic materials that you can use. There's a lot that's coming out that really opens up the world of how to fit a prosthesis, right? Making it a little bit more customizable. Whereas the traditional way of making a prosthesis, you have a lot of fabrication time where you're spending time carving away on a model with your hands. You're doing a lot of pulling of plastic. You're then taking that model or fitting that patient and then taking that, modifying it again, pulling more plastic. There's a lot of waste involved in there too. There's also the laminations aren't as healthy for you as a prosthetist. You're breathing in, fumes and things, carbon dust potentially. So 3D printing has a lot of positive options that way because you're not as you're saving certain amounts of plastic that you're using, some that are recyclable that you can use. There's other ways of fabricating so that you don't have all this waste. So there's a lot of cool options that way. And then you're also not breathing in all these toxic fumes when you're making some socket, right? So there's a lot of advantages to going that direction. But it's been around for a long time. There have been some people that have been doing this for 15 plus years. But there's a few of them, and they have kind of led the way for a lot of these other people to start doing that more. So,
one of the things I noticed when I was showing you my old hook in the background there, when I look at all the 3D printing and all the new ways to make prosthetics, it seems like a person, let's say like me as an example, that may need a prosthetic, they also have some other options to customize their own prosthetic. And I think that's so neat. I've seen imprints and the American flag and things like that. How has that changed? Is that how does that make the patient feel?
It makes them feel, I think, that they get to have a little bit more of a say in what that prosthesis is going to look like and how it's going to work. I did something recently for a guy who I was doing this 3D modeling on the system, and I could change what kind of imprint it was on the socket so he could see what it would look like in the final. And then I'd send him a picture. He'd send it back and be like, oh, could you make this little change, or could you use this picture instead? So we went back and forth. He wanted like this biomech kind of look to it, with like a spring or some gears inside of it. So
yeah, let's take a look. Wow.
I actually was able to print a model here to show him and then see, is this going to look right for you? And so he wants to end up taking this and painting it and having an artist airbrush it. But being able to do something like that really kind of customizes it and makes it very, very much something that he will really enjoy sharing with people and showing people. And that's something I learned pretty quickly, especially in the upper extremity, but also in the lower extremity world. had a kid that I was working with in New York, and he was, I think, 4 years old. He was also congenital amputee, but he really liked Star Wars. And so really all he wanted the prosthesis for was to ride his bike. Ride his bike, maybe do a couple other things, but it wasn't too much, right? So that was the goal. We talked about it. He, again, really liked Star Wars, wanted it to have some sort of like, he liked the bad guys from Star Wars. So we were like, okay. So I found some a personalized like print or fabric that you can laminate. This was when we were doing laminated sockets still.
Wow.
More, and it had little like Lego Star Wars characters, the stormtroopers, and then like
Very
a little,
nice.
yeah, Kylo Ren in there or something. And then we added it's kind of like an open forearm design. So it could have a light in between that looks
Oh.
like a lightsaber. And then we added a light to that. And fitting him with that, he was so excited. He was running around showing everybody. And it was the first time his mom said, like, when he went home with it, he was so excited because he could share like with his friends what he had. And it wasn't like kind of just like, oh, I don't really care about it. It was like, oh, look, this is something that I really like and can share with people and show them what it is. And that just customization and personalization really made a huge difference in that kid's life, right? So that's where I kind of first, I guess, it really, really hit me and struck me. I was like, wow, this is really cool to be able to do.
Well, I think it's a great story because it gives, especially in this young man's story, confidence to the person. And sometimes that can be a little lacking if, depending on the person's journey. But this person went from just another prosthetic to I want to show everyone. And that is very self-empowering. That's a fantastic story. Thanks for sharing it.
Yeah.
One of the things you were showing me in Utah, I should say, is a better way to say it, is I'm going to say it this way, and if I'm saying it incorrectly, please let me know. More of a specialized prosthetics. And I was looking at some of the things, the apparatuses you had there. I'm looking at it going, God, I can lift with this. This one I can do X with this. This one I can maybe, brush, sweep the floor with it. I'm just throwing out some things. Is that something that's very common? Because again, back when I had my hook, it was a one size fits all. That's pretty much, you got what you got, and it was going to try to do all of the different things you can do in life. Are things getting to be a little bit more, this particular device is more specialized for this exercise? I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a lot more available to fit specific tasks. However, with insurance, we still have to focus on what can do the most amount of tasks and give you the broadest kind of general scope of things you want to do, right? So if working out is your primary goal, then we can look at something that's very specific to that. But if your goal is to just return to doing normal things like eating, but also like folding laundry and also just like taking care of yourself, these types of things, you have to have something that has been, that can do all of those things, right? So that's where we get back to that hook that you have. Yeah. We still fit that to this day for a couple of reasons. One being that your line of sight is really good there. And if you don't have feeling, then you rely on your sight for grabbing onto things and knowing where they are. And so that's why that hook is still so popular and big to this day. And then it's relatively inexpensive, and most insurances will pay for that. So that is another big part of it. There are different types of hooks now that kind of have come out from people wanting them for different activities and needing help with more specific activities or different types of activities throughout the day than what the hook is kind of designed for. But for the most part, those types of things are still used. So.
Well, I want to clarify something. In this household, one-handed people can't fold clothes. I know, not supposed to say anything, but we're going to keep it that way. No, I'm kidding, of course. That is always an interesting thing. There's a couple interesting things, even for me, that, in like this my whole life, it's like, well, Yeah, that is a little bit more difficult than I guess it would be for a two-handed person, but I don't really think about it too much.
Right.
One of the things that I really liked about the Handspring website, and we're going to have links to all of this in the description, and we were talking about it earlier. You have a what to expect section on that website, and really kind of talks about it's like 4 steps. One of the steps, or maybe a sub-step, is exactly what we were talking about with the insurance. And I learn a lot as I read these things, because I was talking about with you earlier, when I talk to other amputees, especially ones that have either gone through medical or accidents or those types of things, it seems like, the misconception is because they're not in the world until they have to be, unfortunately, is, maybe you're in an accident and you have a surgery on a Friday, Saturday, you're recovering, Sunday, you get fitted, Monday, you have your prosthetic. That's actually a much longer journey. So what are the steps there, if you don't mind, off the top of your head, that people maybe forget about?
Yeah, I think to understand, prosthetics are custom made, right? So a lot of them, they have to go through this fitting process of that, to me, is one of the most important things. If you don't have a well-fitting socket, then you're not going to wear the thing because it's loose or it's not really working the way you want it to, or it's designed to. So that socket interface is really, really important, and that takes time to custom design and make and fit, and to make sure you have what you need and it's working the way you were expecting it to work, right? So there's that time involved in creating that socket. There's the time involved in training, right? So with patients or clients, the hard thing is that you're going to have to be very patient with the whole process. That's really important, and it's really hard for a lot of people. It's hard for me. I don't have that much patience sometimes, especially I want to get this fit on them. It'd be really nice if they could start using it, but then I've got to wait for them to heal and their volume to shrink, and everything takes time. And so that's one of the most valuable things to kind of learn from talking to the doctor and the prosthetist and everybody, is that you're going to have some patience for this whole process, because everything, even the learning and starting to redevelop how you're thinking about grabbing onto something or cutting food or whatever the simple tasks you used to do were, now you're going to have to figure out a whole new way of doing it. And so patience really goes a long ways with that.
I would imagine too that honesty is from the patient side, has to be something that's extremely important. And I just started wearing glasses recently, and I kind of go back to that. It's like, if I wasn't telling the person that was doing my exam exactly what I was seeing and being honest, there's no time to be a hero. No, I could see that. No, I wouldn't have gotten glasses that really helped me. It's got to be the same with prosthetics, I would imagine.
It is, and I feel like, people are always like kind of nervous, like they don't want to offend somebody, like, oh, it's fine, it works okay. But I'd rather know it doesn't work than to give you something and then it ends up in a closet, right? So my job is to make sure this thing fits and works and operates the way it's supposed to. And so if it doesn't, and you don't tell me, then I don't know any better. So I have people that they'll take it from the office, they seem like it's working really well, they come back a few weeks later and I'm like, oh, have you been wearing it? No. Oh, well, why not? And then you start going over like, oh, well, it wasn't fitting perfectly, and you start kind of picking apart, oh, okay, now I'm finding more information that, oh, it's not working as well because some little adjustment needs to be made, or something's uncomfortable, or something has changed, right? So it's a little bit of that going back and forth, but the more honest that patients or clients are to us, the better off they are in the long run, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say it probably saves a lot of time, because so I guess the lesson is at all of those steps during the process, for the patient to be very, very upfront and honest, and someone like you will not take offense, right? You're there to help them.
Yeah, so, again, I'd rather they wear it than not. So
yeah, great point. You put all that time in. With that nice 3D printed with socket, would that be with that socket, and then someone doesn't use it, I was looking at the array of what you have in the background. I think it's really fantastic. You pointed that out to me, all the nice things you have back there. Is there anything interesting you want to show? I know that we have a podcast and some of it's just, on Apple iTunes, and it might be hard. Maybe we can try to explain it, but.
Yeah, I mean, there's some fun things. This was a failed project that I did. We always are learning more, I feel like, from our failures than our successes. So, but this, well, it's not a total fail project. It's the print came out wrong, but it's a flexible material that I was able to print with, and this end is really heavy because I didn't leave an empty space in here. But you can kind of see, the advantages of having something that is a little bit more flexible, and it's something adjustable. I feel like is something that we're also always interested in, because I feel like that's the direction that we can potentially go with prosthetics. Everything can be a little bit more adjustable, customizable with 3D printing, I think, than traditional fabrication, which is, to do something customizable takes so much more time and effort. Whereas if you can design something and have that repeatable and working every time, you can add an attachment on the back that tightens up and opens up depending on what they're doing, right? It's like a shoe, right? More than it is like something else, like a hard plastic. So it fits a little bit more comfortably, and you have that adjustability of laces, right? Instead of having to wear tight shoes all the time, you might want them tight for hiking, but you might want them loose when you're, halfway up the mountain and your feet swell. So there's certain advantages to having that adjustability, and I feel like that's something that we've been playing around with a lot more too.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. Again, for people that are listening, like on iTunes or some of the just audio podcasts, come on over to our YouTube channel on We're Not Stumped and take a look at some of these neat apparatuses or these neat devices that you have. And that reminds me of my own. I pointed out in the background. I have it right at the bottom here. Yeah, mine was rigid. It was a one size fits me, I guess is how to say it. But when I see these other ways to do things, especially a flexible material, it's just going to make it so much more comfortable for people nowadays.
Yeah, exactly. And if it's more comfortable, then it's more likely to be worn, and then it usually helps out more, right? Because then you don't develop as many problems with your other side, or you have an easier time just returning to using that side, especially if you lost it, right?
I think what you just said too, I want to dig into that a little bit, because as I get older, I'm not the youngest person in the world, but I'm not the oldest either. But that's the one thing with me. I stopped wearing my prosthetic for no reason other than it was just a decision I made when I was about 12, 13 years old. So yeah, a few years, let's just say. That's the one thing that I can tell you that I notice is my shoulder. Yeah, my left shoulder takes a little bit of a beating. My left elbow takes a little bit of a beating. That's one of the advantages to using a prosthetic, right? Is the wear and tear on your good limb.
Yes.
Do you see that a lot?
I do, yeah. It's overuse from just doing everything with that one hand. It does wear over time, and it wears faster than if you have two hands, right? So you can kind of share that load. So I definitely do see that people start to get more arthritis in their thumb or their fingers, and at a younger age than they would if they do wear prosthetics more often. So there's definitely advantages to doing it, right? So otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah, and that's the thing. And even though I don't currently wear one, I don't, and I'm not saying I'll never wear one again, and I advocate for them. I think they're extremely important. That's why I thought it was great to have you on to be able to speak to this. And you kind of breezed over this earlier. I didn't realize your whole family went. I think you went with a group to Colombia and provided prosthesis to patients with limited care. Was that with your family too? Or is this a different?
No, that was with a separate group. Yeah, Hughes International is a prosthetic or a prosthetist that worked in Georgia, Atlanta. So when I was at Georgia Tech, I met him, and he was doing this international trip to Colombia, and I think he does one in Mexico as well. But I joined him and a couple other prosthetists, and we met up with a whole team of local prosthetists in Colombia and helped them kind of work through. I think we had over 40 or 50 patients that we worked with over a week time. So it was very intensive. You're casting on the first day, and then you're starting fitting test sockets, and you're working with 4 or 5 different people at a time and going back and forth. And so it was really, really good because I got that experience right after school and right before my residency. So it was kind of like an intensive, okay, this is what you've learned. Now let's put it to good use and start doing it right away. So I learned a lot from just that short experience. And yeah, it was really, really rewarding too, because you could see like, oh, good. I actually know what I'm doing.
And you're helping people too. I mean, I think that's extremely important because is it the access to care, I would imagine, especially for this type of care, a lot less in those areas?
Yeah, it is. And they were coming from a lot of rural areas. So they didn't have as much access to care in those places. And then we were providing the parts too. So they're donated or used parts that we could give to them and fit them on somebody that are better for them than they would get from somebody local, especially if they have to go through some sort of pay source that they don't have money themselves or something. So
from what I understand too, in the States, it's a little bit harder, if not, I don't know if the word is impossible, but to donate and reuse prosthetics. Is that, how does that work, if at all?
Yeah, you're not supposed to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's
considered potentially insurance fraud, I think. If you're like, getting insurance to pay for something for you and then you immediately turn around and sell it as new. So I think it's not supposed to.
Got it. That makes sense. I had an organization on the first season. They were called the Limb Care Foundation, and based on the laws here, whatever prohibits people from sharing prosthetics here, they do donate them abroad, and they have a really good thing going on. I want to talk about you a little bit. You have some neat letters next to your name because you've done so much and so much studying, and I don't want to breeze over it. CPO and MSPO, and I have down here what it stands for, but I'd rather hear from you and what that means to you to have this kind of certification or knowledge.
I think I don't really think about them that much after my name. I just think of myself as Tim. But Master's of Science of Prosthetics and Orthotics. It's my master's degree from Georgia Tech, and I feel like it was a lot of schooling and good education. And I mean, to me, master's degree kind of shows, and a bachelor's degree just shows that you know how to learn, right? So this field, you're continually learning and figuring things out. So to me, it's just building off of what I kind of got from school, and it's just a little badge that says, hey, he knows how to study and learn and pick things up. So
well, I think it's cool that you continue to learn, and that, as you were saying, one of the most important things. And it's an all in the family thing in your family too, right?
Yeah. My dad was a physician, and so he studied a lot. Worked really hard, which is part of why I knew I didn't want to be a doctor, as he was always working and spent a lot of time. I mean, he did stuff with the family, but he was always having on call and spending a lot of time doing things. So it was one of those things I was like, oh, well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to work that hard, but
but you end up doing well, I guess it's more of a labor of love if you think about it. You did that 3D printing, and that was not necessarily on I don't want to say it wasn't on company time. I'm sure it was, but you know what I mean. I guess if you think it doesn't feel like work if you really enjoy it.
Exactly, and that's kind of what I feel like I've found, which is really nice.
Yeah, that's fantastic. From your perspective, what are the biggest challenges facing really all amputees that are living with limb difference or an amputee with a limb loss? And the reason why I ask that is you see a lot more people like this than I do. I may have some experience living like this, but you see a lot more people. So what are your feelings on that?
Insurance is for sure one of them. Insurances don't quite catch up to the times, and so there may be something that has evidence to work and has been used for years, but they still think of it as experimental, or they don't have codes to put into the billing system to actually get that type of part. So that's been really a big struggle for a lot of people. We'll do a lot of evaluations, and we sit there, we talk to them, and prosthetics aren't cheap. So because they get paid for in kind of one lump sum. So we don't get paid for our time specifically. It's just time for the device itself. So when people are getting those things, it's one of the big challenges, right, is the insurance, understanding if they will cover and what part of that they will cover. And so a lot of times that's one of the hardest things, is to say, oh, I'm sorry, you're going to have thousands of dollars towards this prosthesis. But usually, I mean, most insurances, they have an out-of-pocket maximum, or so they don't have deductibles and all these things that they don't have to pay over that amount, but it can be, $8,000 or something, right?
Yeah.
So they can be pretty expensive. And then again, what they do cover or don't cover, right? So there may be something that this patient is perfect for a activity specific device, but insurance doesn't want to give them that type of device. They want it to be for their home use, and that's it. So that becomes a challenge. Myoelectrics, they have a hard time paying for those.
Yeah.
So insurance is really a big challenge for a lot of people. Other challenges, mental health, I think, is a big one. It's one of those very interesting things, especially with upper extremity, that we use our hands to speak and to talk and to communicate. So for someone who's used to that, used to looking at their hands a lot, to suddenly lose that is like losing a family member, right? So it's a huge problem to kind of go straight into all these doctor's appointments and things without considering that part of the process, right? There's going to be a grieving process. There's going to be these things that you have to learn to expect, right? And going through a mental health expert, I feel like really benefits people, especially if they are going through a traumatic loss. So I think those are two kind of the big things that I've.
Wow, those are two that I've heard before. Thank you for how you explained it on both of them. Matter of fact, we have a common friend, Jeff Solberg in Utah. That's where we met at his event. And I remember him speaking at the Amputee Coalition, speaking about how finger amputees are considered a cosmetic item to get something to help them. And it's just, to me, that doesn't make any sense. It's just, if people lose part of their hand, it seems like it's a little bit harder than just a cosmetic.
Yeah. And I think things are catching up to understanding that. It's just been a slow process, and it continues to be a slow process for people to understand that there's a whole care team that needs to go into, even losing part of your thumb. That's a big deal. And like you mentioned earlier when we were talking before, losing your thumb, I think, is 20% of your functional ability as a person. So it's a huge percentage. I forget. Don't quote me on that number, but
well, I learned it from your website. It said 22%. I learned that from the Handspring website, so I'll make sure again to post that link. It was surprising to me. It's a lot. Another thing I learned too that you brushed on that I didn't realize, because even when I wore a prosthetic, my parents were the ones that did most of they did all the paying, for lack of a better term. I was just a kid, but I didn't realize that prosthetics are I think, as you said, one lump sum, right? So you're gonna pay up front for the prosthetic, but then there's that process, and everyone's journey is unique. I just learned that about a month or two ago, and I find that, I don't know, interesting, fascinating. I don't know what the right adjective is. It should be a little bit more negative than that. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it's interesting. You say pay up front. So sometimes, yes, the patient or the person buying the prosthesis may pay some lump sum up front, but a lot of that is we don't even bill till the end and until you get the device, right? So until you're getting that delivery, really, that's when you pay and everything gets settled. So once you do that, then it can take 2 months. It can take 6 months. We've got some that are 2 years out before we get paid for the actual prosthesis. So that's a big challenge. And again, we've spent all this time customizing and making this device. And then we get to a point where it's like, okay, great, we can get paid finally for this and all the parts we've gotten. And so when we do get to that point, then it becomes, okay, well, now we've got to spend the time figuring out, will insurance pay for it? And will they pay for all of it or just parts of it? And sometimes they'll say, oh, we deny this code, even if we got pre-authorization for it, right? So there's always a dance with the insurance company on that back end to just get paid for the prosthetic and the work that we do. So,
well, thank you for explaining that. That was kind of the spirit of what I was trying to say. It just seems like an odd way to do it. Yeah, I certainly not from your perspective, but from the insurance perspective. You deliver something and have to wait up to 2 years it's hard to run a business that way. Let's put it that way. And if I'm not mistaken, there are like people like the Amputee Coalition and others are trying to do something about that to make it a little bit easier on both sides. If I'm not mistaken. Yeah, they are. And there's several groups that are trying to work on that and kind of lobbying, but the challenge is that it is a small field, right? So not that many people, fortunately, but also that makes it harder to, say something and get people to listen. So one of those challenges is just getting the news out there. And so appreciate, people like you who have podcasts or something where there's an avenue for that. So, well, I appreciate you explaining it better than what I just did. So thank you for doing that, because it is very interesting. And again, even though I don't wear one now, there's probably gonna be a time in my life where I'm gonna need one. So it's something I firmly believe in, the need for prosthetics. So going back to you, and just lastly, if you don't mind me asking this question, what's next for you? Continue learning new ways to make prosthetics and things like that. What's next for Tim?
Yeah, I've been playing around a lot with the 3D design and 3D printing. So figuring out, kind of establishing, I guess, some set ways of doing this for especially upper extremity that allow that adjustability and kind of giving that flexibility, comfort, again, more like a shoe than anything else. I feel like really will help people in the long run and encourage people to be able to wear prosthetics. I think that's been my goal, at least, to try and figure out ways to make prosthetics more comfortable for people. And so I think that's part of Handspring as a whole is, our goal is to be able to fit upper extremity prosthetics better than other people, because we see a lot more of them. And so we get more experience and learn more from the people we work with. Right. So I think that has been, kind of my goal for right now. And otherwise,
that's fantastic.
Yeah. Just enjoying Salt Lake City.
It's beautiful there. Had a great time being up in Utah. It was great meeting you. And I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the podcast, because like I said, I've got a few years experience being an amputee, but the things that I learned from others, especially people in the field, just can't be duplicated. And you certainly taught me a lot today. And I just want to thank you for being on the We're Not Stumped podcast and spending a few minutes of your time talking about Handspring and yourself. So thank you so much.
Mike Boland.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
If you want to be a guest on the program, reach out to Mike at his email address, mike@mikeboland.com. This podcast is produced by One Hand Man Productions. If you are looking to start your podcast, go to onehandmanproductions.com.